Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads. Today I've got for you the first ever episode of the series Every Star Wars Story Ever Told. It used to be coming out as the history of the Star Wars franchise, and I was experimenting with format back then. I've changed the format, found one I really like. I released part 5 a few weeks ago. If you'd like to check that out, I'll link it to this video. But this is a repackaging of that old episode, completely redone. Everything is redone. New graphics, new audio, additions that I missed last time, so I hope you all enjoy it. Again, make sure you hit the like button if you like this content. Subscribe to the channel for more Star Wars content like this. I will be repackaging episodes 2 through 4 as well. And give me a comment. Let me know your favorite thing from this era of Star Wars. Help me get to about 50 likes on this video. That would really help the channel out. And if you are interested in more content from Star Wars Lads and supporting us financially, you're welcome to check out our Patreon and YouTube membership tiers. Pick one that's right for you. You can subscribe for as little as $1 a month. All right, without further ado, let's get into the video. On May 14th, 1944, George Walton Lucas Jr. is born in Modesto, California. Although he always had an interest in art and storytelling, George grew up longing to be a race car driver, and throughout high school would race in some of his local underground circuits at the fairgrounds. Days before his graduation, Lucas was involved in a devastating car crash which left him in need of immediate medical treatment. This shifted his focus away from racing towards an interest in the arts. At Modesto Junior College, Lucas found a passion for avant-garde filmmaking. Upon meeting the notable cinematographer Haskell Wexler, who was at first impressed by George's eye for visual language, George decided to take up filmmaking as his primary pursuit. He transferred to USC's School of Cinematic Arts, where he would later graduate. After graduating, Lucas co-founded the studio American Zoetrope with Francis Ford Coppola. American Zoetrope would go on to produce Lucas's first feature film, THX 1138, a sci-fi film that garnered some critical praise but flopped financially. Eventually, Lucas would start his own independent company, Lucasfilm Limited, and would go on to write and direct American Graffiti. American Graffiti was a smash success both critically and at the box office, which resulted in 5 Oscar nominations, including 2 for Lucas himself for writing and directing. Rewind to 1971. George Lucas initially had an idea for a space fantasy film in the same vein of the Flash Gordon serials he grew up watching. After failing to acquire the rights to the Flash Gordon franchise, George Lucas figured he was going to have to make his own Flash Gordon. In January 1973, George began to write a short synopsis for his own space opera titled Journal of the Whills, centering around the Jedi Bendu apprentice C.J. Thorpe, who would be trained by Master Mace Windu. Told his story was too difficult to understand, George then began writing a new short treatment he called The Star Wars. Once Lucas began to have a more solid grasp on the type of film he wanted to make, he began to shop the film around Hollywood to the major motion picture studios. After being turned down by United Artists, Universal, Paramount, and Disney, he was finally able to secure financial backing from 20th Century Fox's head of studio, Alan Ladd Jr., who took on the project because of his faith in George rather than the film itself. The film was given a very modest production budget of $8 million, and Lucas himself was paid only $150,000 to write and direct. But in what would become one of the most influential deals in Hollywood history, Lucas was also granted full rights to both sequels and franchising, as well as the vast majority of merchandising profits. After financial backing was secured, Lucas continued working out the script, going through multiple drafts that included characters such as General Anakin Starkiller and Han Solo, the Green Fish Monster. By the completion of his second draft, Adventures of the Starkiller Episode 1, The Star Wars, Lucas had streamlined most of his ideas into a simpler story more based in fantasy than sci-fi action-adventure. Eventually, Lucas would compile a nearly 300-page outline detailing most of the events of what would become the original trilogy. Upon realizing the story was far too long for a featured film, he broke the outline into 3 parts of a trilogy, while taking a lot of the best ideas and recontextualizing them for the first film. By August of 1975, he had completed his 3rd draft of the script, now titled The Star Wars from the Adventures of Luke Starkiller, which contained most of the plot points that would wind up being in the first film. By early 1976, the final draft was completed, titled, The Adventures of Luke Starkiller as taken from the Journal of the Whills Saga 1, The Star Wars. As production on the film began, the story of Star Wars was first released as a novelization on November 12, 1976, ghost-written by eventually consistent Star Wars author Alan Dean Foster and published by Ballantine Books. The book was titled Star Wars from the Adventures of Luke Skywalker. The novelization featured many notable differences from the final film, most of which were changed during the film's post-production process. Some of the notable differences include the opening text reading "Another galaxy, another time," rather than "a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away." The The stormtroopers enter the Tantive 4 through the ceiling instead of a door. Vader uses the Force to pull a cup to his hand during the conference room scene. General Tag is choked by Vader instead of Admiral Motti. Luke's lightsaber had a jeweled hilt. The Jabba the Hutt scene from the special editions is featured, and Jabba is described more like he appears than that scene originally. Luke, Biggs, and Wedge are all a part of Blue Squadron instead of Red Squadron. Luke makes 2 runs in the Death Star's trench run instead of 1. The novelization also features a prologue that mentions Emperor Palpatine as a relatively powerless figurehead controlled by the Imperial bureaucracy rather than as a dictator. After a troubled production and multiple cuts of the film, Star Wars was released in less than 32 theaters on May 25th, 1977. As we all know, the film exceeded all expectations and became one of the highest-grossing films of all time, forever changing the way movies were made and establishing sci-fi fantasy as a viable genre for future blockbuster entertainment. The Star Wars line by Marvel Comics spanned 107 issues and ran from April 1977 to June 1986. Issues number 1 through 6 adapted the story of Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope, while issues number 7 through 38 told new adventures about the main characters from the films. Issues 39 through 44 would then kick off the comic adaptation of The Empire Strikes Back. Then from issue 45 on, the book turned back to telling original stories, carrying up to and past the events of Return of the Jedi, until the series came to a close in June 1986 with issue number 107. The Marvel run on Star Wars is notable for many interesting concepts and characters, but the most notable attribute of the Star Wars Marvel line was its establishment of a Star Wars continuity that existed beyond the films. It told the first Star Wars stories post A New Hope and connected the universe through the end of the original trilogy. In other words, the series could be credited as not just the first Star Wars sequel, but also the first new piece of what would become the Star Wars expanded universe. Star Wars comics weren't purely restricted to the traditional single-issue comic format. From 1977 through 1984, Star Wars comic strips were published in a variety of mediums, including Marvel's Pizzazz magazine, and in comic strips by the Los Angeles Times Syndicate across other publications. Similarly to the comics, these stories continued the adventures of our heroes from Episode 4: A New Hope. Written as a direct sequel to his 1976 ghost-written novelization of the first Star Wars film, Alan Dean Foster's Splinter of the Mind's Eye was the first Star Wars novel to be published in the Star Wars Expanded Universe. The book is set 2 years after the events of A New Hope and is based on sequel conversations Foster had with Lucas while writing the novelization of A New Hope. The book tells of an adventure where Luke and Leia crash land on the planet Mimban and are pursued by Darth Vader and the Empire. The character of Han Solo is notably absent from the book, as Splinter of the Mind's Eye was considered for a possible film adaptation, and Harrison Ford had yet to extend his contract past the first Star Wars film. One of the most notable and important lore inclusions in Splinter of the Mind's Eye was the first direct mention of kyber crystals. Released in 1978, the Star Wars Holiday Special reunited Luke, Leia, Han, Chewbacca, C-3PO, R2-D2, and Darth Vader in a 2-hour made-for-TV special revolving around Han Solo and Chewbacca returning to Kashyyyk to celebrate the Wookiee holiday, Life Day, with Chewbacca's family. The holiday special was a disaster and was never aired again after its initial 1978 premiere. George Lucas famously said that he would, quote, be happy if every copy could be tracked down and burned. Despite its critical mauling and hatred by the creator himself, the Star Wars Holiday Special is still being referenced by Star Wars creators today. The animated short film within the film itself, The Story of the Faithful Wookiee, is notable for being the first on-screen appearance of the legendary bounty hunter, Boba Fett. The Star Wars storybooks were a series of adaptations of each of the 3 original trilogy films, featuring full-color photographs from the movies, as well as scenes cut from the final film, with production stills. The A New Hope storybook, titled The Star Wars Storybook, was written by Geraldine Richardson and released on April 12, 1978. The Empire Strikes Back storybook was written by Shep Steneman and was published on April 12, 1980. And finally, Return of the Jedi, the storybook based on the movie, was written by Joan D. Vinge and released in May of 1983. Star Wars Weekly, or Star Wars Marvel UK, was a series of comic books republishing the issues of the Marvel Comics Star Wars series from the United States, along with Marvel Comics Pizzazz magazine comic strips in the UK. Star Wars Weekly began on February 8, 1978, and went through several name changes, including the Empire Strikes Back Weekly, throughout throughout the years before it ended its run in 1986. All titles continued in a single numbering system until Return of the Jedi Weekly, which reset it to number 1. The main difference between the British series and the American series was that the British series took 2 to 3 issues to publish all the content printed in only 1 issue of the American series. Many issues of Star Wars Weekly also included articles and interviews as well as additional stories from other Marvel comics. The Han Solo Adventures was a trilogy of novels written by Brian Daley and published from 1979 to 1980. These stories tell of Han Solo's early adventures with his Wookiee partner Chewbacca in the corporate sector and are set prior to the events of the film Star Wars Episode IV: A New Hope. The 3 stories included in this trilogy were Han Solo at Star's End, Han Solo's Revenge, and Han Solo and the Lost Legacy. One of the Han Solo Adventures' biggest contributions to the Star Wars universe was the fact that it was the first Star Wars book trilogy to ever release. The Star Wars storybooks began releasing in 1979 with the book The Maverick Moon, written by Eleanor Earnhardt. In this story, Luke is enrolled in the new academy for space pilots on an unidentified planet. Known as the Planetary Pioneers, Luke and his classmates are training to transport ships to create new colonies on uninhabited worlds. The second Star Wars storybook, The Mystery of the Rebellious Robot, was also written by Eleanor Earnhardt. This story follows Han Solo and Chewbacca as they travel to Tatooine aboard the Millennium Falcon when R2 suddenly shuts down. Han, Chewie, and Luke Skywalker are puzzled by the sudden bizarre behavior of their robots and the malfunction of their machines. And finally releasing in September of 1979 by Eleanor Earnhardt, the Wookiee Storybook follows young Wookiee Lumpy as he travels to the Netherworld to collect Waska berries for Chewbacca's 200th birthday. Star Friends was a short Star Wars themed drunk driving public service announcement released by the United States Department of Transportation's National Highway and Safety Administration on television in 1979, as part of their Friends Don't Let Friends Drive Drunk campaign. In this short PSA, Figurin Dan and the Modal Nodes play Mad About Me to a crowd of drinking, carouseling aliens in a cantina, where we see an inebriated Tal's patron arguing with the bartender while sitting at the bar. A Duros patron then offers to drive his friend home, rather than allowing the drunk to drive home intoxicated.
The Empire Strikes Back novelization was released in April of 1980, about a month prior to the film's release, and was written by Donald F. Glut. Its narrative is far more closely aligned with its film counterpart than A New Hope, but features some scenes that would end up being deleted, like the Wampa attack in Echo Base, omits famously improvised lines from the film like Han's "I know" response to Leia's declaration of love, and describes Yoda as a blue-skinned alien rather than green. Released May 21st, 1980 and directed by Irving Kershner, The Empire Strikes Back is often considered one of the greatest films ever made. We all know the story of The Empire Strikes Back, so I'm not going to waste your time summarizing it here. But The Empire Strikes Back was revolutionary for recontextualizing sequels as darker, more mature stories that evolve the material of the original. The Empire Strikes Back also gave us our first on-screen appearance of franchise staples like Lando Calrissian, Emperor Palpatine, and Yoda, while giving us our first live-action appearance of Boba Fett. John Williams' legendary Imperial March was also first heard here, and is arguably the most famous piece of music in film history.
The Star Wars radio drama was a 13-part adaptation of the original Star Wars film and is the first of the radio dramatizations of the original trilogy. It was produced in 1981 by the National Public Radio as part of its program NPR Playhouse. The script was written by Brian Daley, who wrote the Han Solo Adventures, and it was narrated by Ken Hiller. Mark Hamill and Anthony Daniels also returned to reprise the roles of Luke Skywalker and C-3PO. The Empire Strikes Back was a 10-part radio adaptation of the original film Star Wars Episode V: The Empire Strikes Back, released on February 14th, 1983 on NPR. The dramatization lasts for a total of 5 hours and was also once again written by Brian Daley. Billy D. Williams returned to reprise his role as Lando Calrissian, and famous actor John Lithgow played Yoda. Return of the Jedi didn't get its NPR radio adaptation until 1996. Return of the Jedi was a 6-part radio series and also was written by Brian Daley. Because it was released 13 years after the film it was based on, it gave Daley the opportunity to incorporate multiple references to the EU that had been established up to that point, such as Mara Jade appearing as Araka in Jabba's palace from Tales from Jabba's Palace, and a number of references to material appearing in Shadows of the Empire. There is an extra scene with Luke building a lightsaber in Obi-Wan's old dwelling on Tatooine, and there is another brief scene added in which Boba Fett and Han Solo exchange words in Jabba's dungeon. Star Wars: The Ultimate Space Adventure Game was a board game released by Parker Brothers in 1982. Players moved their X-Wing pieces to escape Darth Vader's TIE Fighter attack on Hoth and reach the planet Dantooine. Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back is a video game adaptation of the film The Empire Strikes Back for the Atari 2600 and Intellivision video game consoles. In the game, the player takes control of a rebel pilot attempting to destroy the AT-ATs on Hoth. Star Wars Jedi Arena is a game produced solely for the Atari 2600 by Parker Brothers and released in 1983. The game faces 2 Jedi Knights off against each other in a special arena. Each opponent tries to block laser blasts from a training remote with their lightsaber and redirect them back towards the other opponent, thereby knocking out their shield. The first Jedi to receive 3 hits loses. According to the rules, the winner gains the rank of Jedi Master.
The Return of the Jedi novelization was released weeks before its film counterpart in May of 1983 and was written by James Caan. The novelization features more extensive backstory on characters like Emperor Palpatine and Mon Mothma than are featured in the film, contains scenes that would later be deleted like Luke's construction of his green lightsaber, and Vader's confrontation with Moff Jerjerrod at the entrance of Palpatine's throne room, and a number of other minor differences in continuity like a description of Palpatine as beloved by most of the galaxy rather than a dictator.
Star Wars: The Arcade Game, or simply known as Star Wars, was an arcade game produced by Atari and released on May 5th, 1983. The game is a first-person space simulation based around the events of Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope. More specifically, the game covers the Battle of Yavin. It's composed of 3D color vector graphics and is considered one of the most popular video games of all time. Several home versions were also released over the years. The game was the first ever to feature Digidai's voice capabilities, often considered a prime factor of the game's success. Later, the game could also be converted into the Empire Strikes Back arcade game. In the Empire Strikes Back arcade game, players would take the control of Luke Skywalker, set in the Battle of Yavin from a first-person perspective. Players also take control of Han Solo as they escape into the asteroid field in the Millennium Falcon. In 1984, Return of the Jedi levels were also added to the Star Wars arcade game. Levels in the Return of the Jedi game saw players take control of Princess Leia on a speeder bike as they are pursued by Imperial speeders trying to take you down. In another level, the player controls an AT-ST as Chewbacca, while in another level, the player controls the Millennium Falcon as Lando Calrissian. In the last phase of the game, the player enters the second Death Star with the Millennium Falcon, and the player has to blow up the reactor while avoiding the TIE interceptors.
Released May 25th, 1983, and directed by Richard Marquand, Return of the Jedi capped off the story of Lucas's original trilogy, telling the story of Vader's redemption and the Rebellion's victory over the Empire. The film is notable for introducing Ian McDiarmid as Emperor Palpatine for the first time, as well as notable additions such as Rebel leaders Mon Mothma and Admiral Akbar. We also got our first on-screen appearance of the often-mentioned Jabba the Hutt. Return of the Jedi received overwhelmingly positive reception upon its release, even if it was considered the weakest of the trilogy. Return of the Jedi Marvel Comics 1983 to 1984, a 4-issue miniseries published by Marvel Comics that recounts the events of the film. It was the only adaptation of one of the original trilogy films to be published as a miniseries rather than as part of the mainline Marvel Star Wars comic line, and is thus the first ever Star Wars comic miniseries. The Ewoks save the day in 1983, and the Ewoks join the fight. These are loose, kid-friendly adaptations of the Rebels' meeting and alliance with the Ewoks and the Battle of Endor.
The Lando Calrissian Adventures is a compilation of the series of the same name by L. Neil Smith. It details the experiences of Lando Calrissian as captain of the Millennium Falcon before he eventually lost it to Han Solo. Lando is accompanied by his droid co-pilot Vuffy Ra and opposed by Rakur Gepta, part of the mystic order called the Sorcerers of Tund. The Lando Calrissian Adventures also included 3 books, such as Lando Calrissian and the Mind Harp of Sharu, Lando Calrissian and the Flame Wind of Ocean, and Lando
Lando Calrissian and the Star Cave of Thon Baka. Rebel Mission to Ord Mantell was an audio drama scripted by Brian Daly. The story is set just before the events of The Empire Strikes Back and concerns a mission to Ord Mantell where Han, Luke, Leia, and their companions have a run-in with a bounty hunter. Return of the Jedi Death Star Battle is a game produced by Parker Brothers and released for the Atari 2600 in 1983 and the Atari 5200 and ZX Spectrum in 1984. The object of the game is to pilot the Millennium Falcon and destroy the second Death Star. Thank you so much for watching this episode. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't. If you're new, we have Star Wars content every single week as well as live streams. Check out shorts every other day. If you would like to check out the old episodes or the newest episode in the new format, there is a link in the cards to both. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.